Now, a lot of times in the world, we get stories and lessons, and we get figures who are heroes. And the heroes are the ones that oftentimes we try to model our lives after. But sometimes we can learn lessons from a villain's arc. So today I want to tell you a story about a villain and how a villain's arc can actually teach us something about ourselves as we move into the next year. So this villain's arc starts about 505 years ago. A guy whose name was Hernan Cortez. And Hernan Cortez was an explorer, he was an adventurer, he was a conquistador. And he was from Spain, and the Spanish government authorized him to go to the New World, to explore, to bring back riches, to rule over whatever native peoples he found. And so he traveled with ships and with men to the New World. And when he arrived in Cuba, he had major beef with the governor of Cuba, to the point where the Cuban governor pulled Cortez's commission. The ability to go out, to explore, to conquer new worlds, the governor of Cuba said, no, you're done. Cortez disobeyed the governor of Cuba and took men and ships and left anyway. And he arrived on the shores of Mexico. The problem was that Cortez had a contingent of men who were still loyal to the governor of Cuba. And he knew that if they had the chance, they would take a ship and return. They would mutiny and go back to the governor of Cuba because they were loyal to him. So rather than have to face a mutiny and have his men take his ship and flee, he ordered the sinking of his own ships. He scuttled his own ships so that the men would have no choice but to press on and move forward. There was no turning back. And Cortez is the one who actually brought about the destruction and end of the Aztec Empire. From that moment, scuttling his own ships, forcing his men to move on, to fight forward and never turning back, brought about the downfall of the Aztec Empire. Not a good guy, right? I don't want to make any mistakes about this. Not a good man, but a true villain. But even so, in his villain arc, we can understand something about the power of moving forward and not turning back, and being so pressed on the journey that we say we will do whatever it takes to move forward and to prevent ourselves from going back. Cortez scuttled his own ships to prevent people from going back. There's a great verse from the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament. It says in Isaiah chapter 43, "Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." God says, forget the past. I am doing something new. And we are standing at the edge of a brand new year. And so we have a choice to make. Are we going to dwell on the past? Everything that happened in 2024 or even before that? Or are we willing to let it go, to move forward, to see what God is doing new in our lives and in our world? But this is not an easy thing. The idea of moving forward, it's not an easy task. And so we have to understand transformation is more than just about like picking something that we want to try. Because lots of people will have a New Year's resolution. In fact, most people in America have some sort of concept of a new year wanting to try new things. But the average person drops their New Year's resolution within a couple weeks. In fact, some university studies have shown that out of everybody who tries to do a New Year's resolution, fewer than 10% actually succeed in accomplishing it. About 90% discard their resolution within the first couple weeks. So we have to understand that transformation is not just about picking something that's a good idea, but we really got to latch on to something that that we feel is important for us in our own transformation and our own growth. And it can't just be someone else's idea. Someone else can't say, I think you should try this. That might be a nice idea, but if we don't own it, if we don't internalize it, then it's not very likely to stick. In Romans, the Apostle Paul tells us, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He's saying, whatever the world looks like, that's not how we're supposed to be, but we're supposed to be changed. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be sinking the ships that held us back so that we can move in a new direction. But Paul says that calls for transformation, an internal transformation. He says the renewing of your mind. Paul talks about a spiritual, internal transformation that is different from just saying, you know what, I want to drop weight. You know what, I want to finish my education. You know what, I want to do. He's not talking about that kind of surface stuff. Paul is talking about a deeper change within us. And this kind of transformation it's very spiritual in nature. And it really comes down to our faith driving us, where we plug into something bigger than us. The Commandant of the Marine Corps is really big on the idea of spiritual fitness. And so I talk about it quite a bit, but the idea of spiritual fitness for the Marine Corps comes down to 5 simple words: inner strength from higher purpose. That's it. That's our basic definition. When I talk to Marines about spiritual fitness, that's what it is. Inner strength from higher purpose. And what it means is that when we plug into something that is bigger than ourselves, it can give us the strength and the power to keep walking forward. The idea of burning the ships or sinking the ships and not going backwards but moving forwards, that kind of inner strength from our higher power is what spiritual fitness looks like. And Paul says in Philippians, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Now, Paul was talking about going through hard times and good times. He says, I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to have plenty. I can endure all of it through the one who gives me strength. So as we are looking at transforming our lives, moving forward, sinking our ships so that we can't turn back, we do it in the strength of God, who is our rock and is our foundation. That no matter what life throws at us, with God on our side, we have that fortitude, that spiritual strength to push on, to keep going forward and not turn back. In fact, in Scripture, Paul talks about it like getting a new suit of clothes. Paul says, the Christian life is like putting on new clothes and taking off the old clothes. It's Cortez sinking the ship so that there's no going back. It's throwing the old rags in the trash so that you can move forward in a new set of clothes that looks like godly character. So we take off the old self, that's us, the selfishness, the pride, the greed, the lust, all the things that pull us back. Paul says we're going to take those off and discard them. And we're putting on a new set of clothes. As we move forward into the new year, we've got to be thinking about how we can put on a new set of clothes as God's people. What does it look like for us to be moving into the new year? What does God want you to look like? What does God want you to act like in the new year? So from a Christian perspective, our New Year's resolutions have to be about our character, about who we are. Not what we look like, how much money we have in the bank account, but it's about who we are and what we act like. This is the kind of resolution that God cares about. So we can say, in 2025, I want to be more gracious. In 2025, I want to demonstrate more patience. In 2025, I want to practice peace. In 2025, I want to fill in the blank. But we have got to decide what our character is going to be like in 2025 based on God's character. And so how do you pick resolutions like this? How do we pick resolutions as God's people? And I think really it comes down to this: identifying your value, and then based on the value, identifying the goal. That's really what it comes down to. What do you value in life? And based on your values, that gives you a goal to shoot for. Chaps, that's all well and good, but how do we do that? So 3 practical steps, all right, for how you can make sustainable resolutions. Ready? Number 1, you have to establish some sort of accountability or partnership with someone else. You got to tell somebody about it. If you tell somebody about your resolution, about how you want to grow in Christian character, you're more likely to stick with it. Not just telling somebody about it, but letting them ask you how you're doing. And that's the tough one, because we don't like to be vulnerable to other people. It is very hard for human beings to be vulnerable and to expose ourselves in an area where we feel we are weak. A few weeks ago, I was teaching a class to a group of Marines, and there were probably 50 Marines in the class. And we were talking about strengths and weaknesses. And I put up a list on the screen of different qualities. And I said, if you had to pick your top 2 strengths, which ones would you pick? And people would raise their hands and they would share, oh, these are my strengths, these are my strengths. They had no problem sharing. And then I said, if you were to pick the bottom 2 that you would say are your weakest, that you have the most problems with, that you need to work on, which ones would you pick? And the room went completely silent. Because it is not easy to share our vulnerabilities and weaknesses with others, especially if we feel we're not in a safe place. We don't want someone to know our weaknesses, especially if we don't know them and trust them. Finally, one dude on the side raised his hand and said, if I had to pick my weaknesses to work on, these are the 2 I would pick. And as soon as he spoke and people realized it was safe to speak, other people started raising their hands. These are my weaknesses. These are my weaknesses. And it ended up being an incredible time of sharing when they realized it was a safe place to be vulnerable. So the most important thing you can do for creating sustainable resolutions is find someone that you can share with, someone you trust, that you feel safe with them asking you, hey, how are you doing this year in your journey? The Apostle Paul had people like Timothy and Luke as his partners in ministry to help him. But you got to have someone in your life. It can be a friend, it can be a family member, it can be someone in the shop, some sort of mentor, but you have to give them permission to speak into your life. Because if you don't give them permission, accountability is nothing. I've tried this before, and this is my own weakness. I've set resolutions for myself lots of different ways over the last few decades. And one of my ongoing resolutions is I want to get fit, right? I want to drop weight like a lot of people. I want to drop weight. I want to get fit. And so I've asked my wife sometimes to hold me accountable. Say, I need you to check on me. And she says, okay. And then when she asks, she sees me eating Pop-Tarts or eating ice cream or eating junk food. She's like, hey, how does that fit in with your goals? Then I get defensive. Back off. Why are you attacking me? And she'll say, you asked me to help hold you accountable. Why are you getting defensive when you asked me? And I'll be like, oh, right? You have to make sure that when you ask someone to help hold you accountable, you let them do it. That's why it's got to be someone you trust, that you have confidence in. But the number one thing that you guys can do is establish an accountability partnership with someone else. The second thing that you can do to have a sustainable resolution for the new year is you've got to embrace a growth mindset. And that simply means we understand that there's no such thing as failure. They are just teaching and learning opportunities. Every setback doesn't mean we're done, we scrap it, we're not even going to try anymore. It's simply a growth opportunity. So we got to change our mindset, because as you are trying to make progress in your resolution, sometimes you'll misstep. You'll trip, you fall down. Instead of saying, oh, I can't do this, I'm done, I'm going to throw in the towel, you get yourself up, you say, how can I grow from this? How can I get better because of this? God wants us to have a growth mindset as we progress in our character and our walk with Jesus. Don't think about it as a failure. It's an opportunity to grow and learn. And the third practical thing that you guys can do to help create sustainable resolutions is you can have some sort of daily reflection or journal to keep track of how you're doing. One of my favorite content creators on social media is a guy who goes by Scotty K Fitness. And you can look him up. He's super jacked, really muscular, and does a whole bunch of like nutrition, recipes, funny guy. But he always tells people, if you are not tracking your progress, you're not going to be able to make it. So he says, count your calories, track your progress. We need to do like a daily check. How did today go? What went right today? What can I do better tomorrow? Those are the three things that you can do as we're moving into this next year to grow and progress in a sustainable way. Because I don't want to see you guys make some resolutions and in a couple of weeks say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. No, we are always changing. And like Cortez, we're going to sink the ship so that we don't go back. And again, this isn't about weight or fitness. This isn't about education. This is about your heart, who God is calling us to be. God wants us to move forward and not go back. So sink the ships. Everything that used to pull you back to the old way of doing things, let it go down to the bottom of the sea, because God is calling us to move forward to a new life. Today, even though we're just a few days away from New Year's, we can start today. So my encouragement to you guys is this: to identify the things in your life and in your heart that God is saying, it's time to cut that out. It's time to let that die because we're moving in a new direction. And again, I don't know what God is going to be saying to you, but I guarantee you that everybody here in this room has got something in our lives that God is saying, it's time to cut that out. It's time to move on to something new. Like Isaiah said, forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. God says, see, I am doing a new thing. The prophet Jeremiah once wrote for God, he said, I know the plans I have for you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Now, he was talking to the nation of Israel as they were going through a hard time, and he's trying to remind them, guys, I haven't forgotten you. I am here. I know what you're going through, and I've got so much more in store for you. And we can take that as encouragement for us. God has not forgotten you. Whatever you're going through in life, God has not forgotten you. He's walking right beside you. And he knows where your journey is going, and he says, I've got something even better down the road. Now it's time to sink the ships. That might be a temptation to go back and move on to what I've got coming down the road. This New Year's, I need you guys to find that thing in your life that God says, no more. We're done. Let that go, and we're moving on to a new direction, a new life. And then in a sustainable way, start making progress. Find that accountability partner, someone who's willing to help keep you on track, keep you in check, to embrace that growth mindset. Even when I trip and I stumble, it's not the end. It's opportunities to learn and grow better. After the light bulb came out, Thomas Edison was joking about the 10,000 attempts to get to the light bulb. He said, I didn't fail 9,999 times. I simply found 9,999 ways not to do it. And then he finally did it. That's growth mindset. Everything that doesn't go right is simply an opportunity to figure out the better way forward. Because you will make mistakes. We're all human, and that's okay. God calls us to keep driving forward, to hold on, knowing that God has got something better if we're willing to burn the ships, let them sink, and drive forward to what God has got. 2025 can be your year for making progress in your character, in your heart, in your Christ-likeness. So let's take those steps. Let the old just sink. There's no going back. There's only going forward to him. Would you pray with me?